This is Museum Backstage, where we pull the curtain wide open on the hidden world of museums, galleries, and cultural spaces. If you think museums are only about quiet halls and priceless objects, think again. Behind the scenes is a world of high-stakes decisions, creative problem-solving, and people who keep culture alive against the odds. You will hear bold voices, untold stories, and fresh perspectives that challenge how we see preservation, power, and the future of collections. Here is your host, Samantha Hunt Duran.
Hello, hello. Welcome to Museum Backstage. Today, we're behind the scenes with a museum leader who's helped reopen and expand museums and has managed artworks by the caliber of artists we study in art history. He specializes in exhibitions, museum operations, contemporary art, and the management magic that holds together complex museum projects. Today, he's the founder of LRY Art Collection Management, where he works with artists, collectors, museums, and galleries to make collections thrive. When he's not working, you'll find him surfing, reading, discovering new music as a DJ, experimenting in his kitchen, and tending to his garden. With that, say hello to my next guest, Luis Yllanes. Welcome to the show, Luis.
Hi, thank you so much, Samantha. It's great to be on Museum Backstage.
Thank you. We're really looking forward, well, I'm particularly looking forward to this conversation. And, today we're going to talk about the art ecosystem as a whole, how museums, galleries, and private collections all fit together by touching on topics like what makes a great exhibit, because in all of those spaces, things are on exhibit, the life of artwork beyond its creation, and launching a business in this crazy, wonderful industry. And those who stay on at the end will hear fun rapid-fire Q&A with Luis and a special offering from his company. How does that sound to you, Luis?
That sounds great. I'm honestly honored to be on here. So,
thank you. Well, we're flattered and honored to have you. So to get us started, you've worked in museum settings, gallery settings, in private collections. How do you see the relationship between artists, galleries, museums, and private collectors? And is that relationship changing, or do you think it's kind of stable?
Ooh, that's a great first question. I think it's continuously evolving. I think between an artist, studio, a gallery, a museum, it's almost like that scale, right? This vertical, say, ladder, so to speak, where things are born in an artist studio, and then eventually through the market side, go to a gallery, and then eventually, maybe, hopefully, they end up in a museum. And in each step of the process, things are handled a little differently. I think certain artists, after they've had their first museum show or are widely collected, that becomes a lot more, say, structured in a way, because they know where that end process will end up. And obviously along the way, there's that the collectors, right, who come in and support the artists. So I think over the years, at least, having been in the art world for almost 25 years, I've seen that really changed in terms of where artists weren't really thinking about it at the outset. Some were, but to now they've really kind of come in a way to really have archivists on staff. If they, obviously bigger artists can do that, and have really thought about their work and every step of the process, because, from where they start to maybe where their career ends up, they want to have really a lot of creative control over what looks like. And it's always fun to kind of see them engaged in that and look at something that they created, 20 years ago next to something they created a year ago in the context of a museum setting. And they're like, it's fun to kind of, for them to even realize their own growth has how it's come along the way. So.
That's really interesting, thinking through that relationship as it relates to maybe an art's life cycle, which gets me to my next question. An artwork's life doesn't stop or start, when it leaves an artist's studio. It's just kind of, after it's created, it goes through this journey through these different spaces. And I wonder how you see that journey in a museum and in a collection, how it changes the life of an artwork per se? What does it add to be in these different settings that than it would have, if it weren't ever in a collection, either private or institution?
I think the way it changes an artwork's life, and and it's interesting because I think even maybe to backtrack for a minute, when an artist creates something, I think they generally are, once they're done with that creation, it almost doesn't belong to them anymore. It's out in the public, and now it takes on a life all of its own, right? Because it could mean so many different things to different people. And depending on, if it's something that's purchased through a gallery or it ends up in a museum show, it can go down different paths, different routes. To me, I think when we get to see an artwork that let's say, is purchased by a collector, but then ends up in a museum setting, it's always interesting to think about the context of that work, that when it's not in that museum, it actually is in someone's home. And I always think that's kind of a little bit just, yeah, it's pretty exciting to be like, oh wow, somebody gets to look at this every day. Like, we made a special trip to come and see this exhibition, but somebody gets to wake up to this, and so to them it must mean something even more special. And the life of that work really can vary, because once it's shown in a museum, that obviously that provenance that it gains, right? It becomes, and I hate to use the word becomes more important, but it does gain that pedigree of saying, oh wow, this was important enough to be shown as part of this retrospective at the Guggenheim, or some wherever it may be shown. And I think that definitely gives it that level of importance that maybe certain work from that same artist doesn't have. But that can all just be driven by different factors, right? Everything from the curator, right, to the particular museum. So it's such an interesting way to kind of the way that navigates for a particular artwork. So it's, yeah, sorry, I probably was maybe a little bit off on too many tangents on that.
No, no, no. It was a really complicated question I had. It's very open-ended. No, I really appreciated something that you mentioned, which is really this distinction of experiencing art in a museum versus in your home. And I'm wondering, do you think, in your experience with private collectors, do they recognize themselves as stewards rather than just like owners of artwork? Or do you think that private collectors see themselves a little bit differently than maybe a museum would see itself in that responsibility or interaction with the art?
Yeah, that really all depends on the collector, right? I think certain collectors collect with this idea that their collection will eventually go to a museum, right? Their view is that while they get to enjoy it for this, period of like their lives, or maybe they do pass it on to their children, I think eventually they want to see it continue, and it's part of their legacy, where they're like, yes, I'm going to donate it to this institution because I want future generations to appreciate this. But not all collectors, I think, look at their collections that way. Some look at it, to be honest, very much as an investment, right? It's an asset, and the asset great, gains in value, and then they do profit off of it sometimes. Others, and I've seen this too, and I'm not going to obviously name names, collectors that just end up acquiring a lot of artwork, but they don't give a lot of thought to what they're acquiring. And so they sometimes don't, think about that proper care. And I remember this when I was, during my time in Miami, receiving gift for the museum. But unfortunately, the works were just really in really not great condition. And so as an institution, it became something we would inherit, and we unfortunately had to, pass on that donation, because we're like, wait a minute, this is somebody who just acquired without giving much thought to that responsibility of, you acquire an artwork, guess what? There is some responsibility to take care of it. So yeah, I think it's going to vary depending on who, acquires it, and their approach to that.
Yeah, that's a great point. In my own kind of practice, I I do see that variance in, especially in private collectors, about, if this piece is just for purely investment, or if it's like a passion piece that they just love and they're going to pass it on to a museum or their children or somewhere in between. On either end of that spectrum, preserving and caring for the collection is equally as important for different reasons, right? On one end, clinically, you're protecting an investment, you're protecting that asset and that resource to preserve the value of it. Because as we know, if things are really deteriorated and damaged, the value goes down. And on the other end of the spectrum, caring for these things and cherishing them only makes them last longer for future generations. So I think that's a great point that you brought up. And I'm wondering, do you think that private collectors can learn from museums and that museums can learn from private collectors in the ways in which they have a relationship with the art in their collection?
Certainly, I think that's an area where sometimes collectors don't realize that museums can be resources, right, for the proper care of artwork, right? And oftentimes it's free, right? Just to get information on, hey, what's the proper, temperature to store a certain work at, or how, how should I protect this while in transit? Just, any number of topics that can relate to a particular artwork. Museums can certainly offer their expertise in knowledge of for museum collectors. So that's, I think, a resource that often sometimes is untapped. But if I think that's kind of a knowledgeable collector that understands that they're not just, the museums aren't just there to acquire works and continue to do that, but they can be there as a resource for them. So it's in my career, honestly, that question from collectors, unless they were knowledgeable about that, it didn't often come up. And you realize that it's sometimes they contact museums when there's a problem rather than being proactive. And that's unfortunate, because by that point it's like, okay, well, if you had kind of done this at the outset, we might not be in this particular situation. And I think a lot of the times that now, because of, be honest, climate change, depending on where a collection is based, you have to start thinking about that process, right? About like, hey, what happens, if, and when I worked in Miami for many years, it's like, what happens when you get hit by a hurricane, right? How do I protect these things? What's my plan for, emergency preparedness? I think that's an important part of protecting your artwork and your assets. So
That's a great point about climate changing and being in areas that are susceptible to earthquakes, hurricanes, fire, whether it's forest fire or just, urban fire scenarios. And I agree with you that a lot of the private collectors that I speak to, this proactive prevention, of damage isn't really something on their radar, whereas it is very much for most museum institutions. They have museum operations, emergency operations plan that usually addresses the collection. Do you think that there's a maybe affordable and sustainable way for us to bring that practice into private collections of this emergency preparedness and this proactive maintenance of the collection?
I think there is, but it's kind of bridging that gap, right, between that, collectors, because you can't really group them all into one place and be like, all right, let's find a way to communicate with them all. But organizations like, ARCS, Association of Registrar and Collection Specialists, or other bodies that come together and discuss these topics, right, and how to put that out there. And I think it's something that you just have to be more aware of, to realize like, hey, what we're doing matters in terms of providing a tool and knowledge to people that are in take that on as something that they're doing, art collecting. So it's I think finding that connection point, because not everyone is aware of it.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that private collectors in particular, they're existing maybe parallel to this museum ecosystem where, we know where all the resources are. We know where all the professional organizations like ARCS that you mentioned, and AIC, the American Institute for Conservation, things like that, where they're a wealth of information that museums might know about, but private collectors don't. And I think it's an issue on both sides where, private collectors don't know that this exists, but also these institutions aren't necessarily directly reaching out to private collectors to be involved in conferences and in making workshops, webinars, other programming. And I just am making a note, we should include some of these resources in the show notes for any lectures out there who are saying, well, you're telling us to be aware of the resources. Let us know. What are they? We'll definitely include those in the notes. I guess sticking on this topic of art collections, have you seen a shift in your tenure of how people think about collecting, especially maybe as newer or younger generations of collectors are entering this field?
Yeah, I think it's also, one of the things they're definitely, I think new collectors, I think sometimes do think more proactively. They're maybe more practical in nature about that. And especially I think as it relates to new media, right? Because when it comes to certain works of art that are, maybe they're ephemeral in nature, right? So there's less of a concern about, we'll say, conservation, right? I've worked, it's an artist, Mauricio Catalan, who most people may know as, the banana taped to the wall. That's like, there's actually very little conservation to do with that because it's a conceptual work of art. So you're not really actually buying the banana or the tape. You're just buying basically that concept of that allows you to display it. So, but new media, whether it's, film or digital or different things, is kind of requiring a different view of how to look at things, right? How to know how to properly care for things that maybe over time start to deteriorate. And the way that technology and new media has continued to sort of replace itself, like you start to realize like, oh my God, they don't make this particular VHS tape anymore or certain things, right? And that's, I think, an important part of understanding that there has to be essentially duplicates of a lot of things in order to maintain that, right? I think of Nam June Paik, right? And certain works are now basically almost impossible to conserve because the media is just obsolete. So
yeah, that's a great point that you bring up, that especially in newer collections, time-based media, these digital kind of things, and even, before digital, analog media, tape media, and CDs, and all of these things that not too long ago, it was really easy to play a CD, and now I don't think I could. And that branch of conservation in my field is pretty new. We call it time-based media conservation usually. And yeah, it's really about reformatting, finding ways that you can maybe digitize analog media, but then there's all these considerations of, well, how does it change aesthetically from one media to the next, especially analog to digital, but even bringing something, from an old digital file type to a new one. Does it change the color? Does it change the speed? It's so complex. And I'm wondering if collectors are really aware of how difficult it is to maintain these new media types.
no, yeah, I think that's something that I think depending on what they're collecting, new collectors, even old collectors, I think should be aware of, depending on, asking a lot of questions, especially from galleries or artists about certain media, about everything from how it's shipped to how, what the conservation process is. I had a client who's purchased a work that was ship rolled, and this was a work that was made from epoxy resin. And that was probably not the best way to ship it because it ended up cracking, arrived to her just in, unfortunately with a lot of losses. Fortunately, the artist said, no, we can conserve. This is part of the process. And like explained that, we'll just apply and use gloss over it. So it was able to be, it was fine in the end. But I think collectors have to be aware of like that, what they're, if it's, and most things, depending on what they're acquiring, if it doesn't fit like in us, say, easy to something that they're going to take with them, it's going to take, some care and some thought about that, right?
We have been speaking about collections in the context of museums, a little bit of gallery, definitely in private collections. In each of those spaces, the artworks are on exhibit, right? I mean, if they're not in storage, the purpose is for these to be used, to be seen, admired. And I'm wondering, because you've operated in all of these spheres, what makes an exhibition truly impactful beyond just, like where it is, design and content? Is there a way or a through line that you see of impactful exhibit, whether it's in a private collection or in a gallery or in a museum?
I mean, all exhibitions are generally, important. There's so much that goes into that process, right? Just everything from obviously the curation to the artist's work to the installation. So, they'll take a lot of work to put on. And even the most simple ones actually can sometimes be the most complex. But I think how I would define sort of that is, I'd say return visits. Sometimes people come through and they may just see it once and then they realize, wow, that was amazing, I want to go see it again, right? It's that ability to continue to engage and discover new things that keep you coming back to an exhibition. I think to me that's a true sign of like, hey, somebody really thought about this and wanted to get people to continue to ask questions and continue to come back again and again. Sometimes it's just the name of the artist, right? Like, worked on a Warhol exhibition, and that was just like, oh, everybody hears Warhol, and they're like, they flock to it. But to me, some of my favorites have always been sort of more interactive in a way that you can kind of like, you feel like you're walking through the artwork. It definitely makes you question the artist's process and think about, what they're thinking about when they go on to create these works. There was an art artist, Gareth Wynne Evans. I can't remember if he's Scottish, English, but just produces some beautiful light-based and sound-based works. And to me, it was such a exciting concrete fire pit to one of my favorites, acquiring live animals for an exhibition. They can be some crazy things, but I think it's always fun for me to be part of that process, because then you're like, oh, wow, we get to actually work together to make something happen. It's not just work showing up and we put them up on the wall. So,
That's special. Yeah, it almost disrupts the normal flow that we were talking about, that art is created in an artist studio, and then maybe it'll go to a gallery, then maybe to a museum, collector, back to museum, whereas this is being created in a museum.
right.
Oh, how engaging. And I'm sure, our visitors, if the galleries are still open at that time, just the impact of seeing something being built in a space is probably enough to get someone to come back to see it when it's all created.
Exactly. No, that is very true. You're like, wait a minute, you got to, get this little window into that process, and so.
Yeah. Well, I am hearing too that this like through line of immersive art, immersive art experience in particular, it's really having a moment now, especially I'm thinking of Meow Wolf, and even of traveling exhibits that are more light, based exhibits like traveling Van Gogh, that it's not, not Van Gogh's work, but it's Van Gogh's projections of his work maybe in motion. And it really is speaking to this, I don't know if it's a new wave necessarily, but like a renewed interest in being immersed in a space. I'm wondering if you can speak more to like immersive art experience.
It's funny that you mentioned that, especially Van Gogh, because I always kind of would poke fun at that. And they're like, wait, you don't actually get to see a Van Gogh. But I think if it gets people to appreciate that, his work, I mean, not everyone can, make a trip to the Netherlands and go to the Van Gogh Museum and see actual Van Goghs. So this is a great way to kind of connect with an audience that gets to be immersed in that, right? So I think it's, artists definitely find ways to connect with an audience beyond just the right two-dimensional work on a wall. Even those can transfix you in a way. But when you can really immerse somebody in an environment that you've created, as an artist and touches upon so many senses besides visual, right? And everything from the smell to sounds to, you know, I think that's always a way that you're going to really kind of stay in people's minds, and it's something that you'll remember for a long time. So, um, I worked on an exhibition of this artist couple, Janet Cardiff and George Burris Miller, and it was an exhibition called The Killing Machine, and their works were just, I mean, talk about immersive. You know, it's like video, sound, audio, like just creating whole environments that just really would stick with you, and being able to kind of see that process come together, especially not just as a viewer, but as somebody who worked like backstage, right behind the scenes, is pretty exciting to be a part of. So.
I'm wondering, I've always kind of thought that maybe this new kind of wave of people being really interested in immersive exhibits speaks more to maybe our attention span or what it takes what it takes to really move us nowadays that we're used to, like, content on demand. We're used to being entertained. I've heard people who don't really go to museums and galleries, ask, well, how do you like to go to those? They're so boring, and yet they'll rant and rave in a good way about Meow Wolf, for instance. Do you have a take on that? Do you think it's because our attention spans are just we need more pizzazz nowadays?
It could be. It could be, but I think it's also right. What isn't there something like, people at a museum, people stand in front of the painting for an average of, I forget, it's some like ridiculous, like 15 seconds or something like that. Whereas when you go to exhibitions that are immersive, you end up spending a lot more time in that because, whether it's like, oh, I want to take a selfie or whatnot, you're transported into a completely new environment. And I think that is an opportunity to kind of like engage with the audience in a different way. Maybe it's a James Turrell. I don't know. It could be so many different artists that work in that medium that's like really like, they're not just, they're creating whole environments rather than something that people don't spend, can just kind of walk by.
Well, this maybe goes back to what we were talking about earlier about how to make exhibits engaging for museums. What makes people come back more than once to an exhibit. I'm wondering if there's a way museums and maybe even galleries, but especially museums, can learn from these artists who are doing these immersive kind of installation type pieces and take the kind of essence of that and bring it into other galleries that maybe they aren't an artist like that, but an assemblage of artists, and how to usher the viewer and the museum goer through an experience that's a bit more immersive. I wonder if there's ways that we can shift our traditional exhibition development lens to appeal to that more.
Well, I mean, I think there's obviously there's always the question of economics, right? Those things aren't always inexpensive to put on. I mean, they require so many moving parts, such an undertaking, and there's not many galleries that can actually afford to do that, right? There's a process. So if you can, maybe they work with the artist to develop something that can, you know, make it make sense for everyone involved, then they can start to produce that more and more. But I think from a strictly commercial side, galleries have to be able to sell in order to stay viable, right? And that doesn't always mean it's something that's that immersive environment, because for people to essentially, or I should say, for art collectors to purchase a James Turrell, you've got, I mean, very few that can do that. So it becomes, I think, a matter of finding, new opportunities for maybe that, I don't know, that economy, right? I think also you don't want to have to charge people every time to come look at an artwork, but
Yeah, it's the reality. And throughout our episode, I've been speaking of the through lines of exhibition. Things are on exhibit in a gallery or in a private collection or a museum, but fundamentally these spaces are different. A gallery has a bottom line to meet in terms of selling artwork. Museum has a bottom line in terms of getting people to pay admission or getting donations. And private collectors, it's a totally different space. And so, to your point, a gallery isn't going to spend all of the time and money needed to wow, wow someone so that they're moved and come back and see things that they're trying to get people to buy and to purchase. Whereas a museum maybe has a bit more of a mission-driven purpose to awe and inspire and get people to come back, not to buy anything, but to pay their admission.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And I think it's, yeah, each one is going to approach things in a very different fashion. So, but I think there's also, within galleries, and you definitely saw it a lot more in like the 90s. There's certainly there was a school of artists who were very much in that DIY ethos and component. And it was like, hey, we're going to make it happen, even if it's, we're using found materials or whatnot. So that was always an opportunity to create something, in a very scrappy way. So, not everything has to be this high end, like, oh, it's so sharp, it's so well done. So,
Yeah, it's a great point. Good art doesn't need to be polished. It doesn't need to be in a gallery, really scrubbed up, nice white wall gallery space. It doesn't have to be in a museum. I think that some of the most impactful art experiences that I've had are in spaces that are really surprising and unexpected, such as, in a public setting or in kind of a pop-up way where it's a way that can be discovered. And part of the charm and intrigue about it is that it's in a setting that we're not really expecting, or maybe it's in materials that we're not used to seeing on exhibit, such as bubble wrap or other types of more ephemeral materials, to your point.
no, that's very true. I mean, one of the artists who I really enjoyed working with and I worked with in the past is Tom Sachs, and he's one who really just shows you everything, right? He takes all the materials and you can see every screw, everything that was there in order to assemble the work to create it. So it's very much, that you see the process. So
Yeah. There is something appealing to getting a behind the scenes sense of or understanding how something has come together in that unpolished way of assembling things. You can kind of see its anatomy. I want to switch gears a little bit because we're talking about all these spaces that you've worked in, and I want to touch on the fact that you've started your own business. And I guess to start, after years in gallery and museum leadership, what inspired you to start your own firm?
I think part of it was realizing I was in a new environment. I moved from Colorado here to Northeast Florida, and realizing that I was like, wait a minute, you know what? It's a very different type of art scene, but realizing that for me, I was like, wait a minute, how do I stay engaged in the art world in a way that for me served a purpose? So kind of a little bit out of necessity, I was like, okay, well, this could be a great opportunity. I have skills that I've, accumulated over the years. And I had already been doing that work a little bit on the side. So I just said, okay, well, let me now just push into that completely and offer it to art collectors.
What's it been like starting your own business in 2025 where, the art scene, well, at least the museum scene, I'll say, is in a little bit of turmoil? Have you seen any impacts of just, the overall environment that we are? Or has it been, like if you were starting it any other year?
I definitely think there's a bigger challenge here, and there's a lot that it takes to kind of push out your own business, because it's just, I think discipline is key, right? You end up, I think, especially at the outset, working more and longer. There's a great level, obviously, of flexibility, but you're doing so much, right, for yourself. And a lot of people aren't used to that, and I think that takes a lot of effort. And so, you have to continue to stick to it, and I think at some point you hope that it bears fruit. So
Yeah, what advice would you give someone who's transitioning maybe from an institutional role to entrepreneurship in our field?
patience, patience, and it takes time. And like I'm honestly just getting started myself, so I kind of almost am giving myself that advice to be like, okay, you know what, it's going to take time. You have to invest your time in it, and right, and So I appreciate that I at least, we'll say, kind of got it to that goal of like, all right, let's launch it, get it off the ground. And hopefully that, but I have to continue to work at it. There's a lot of that business development side to get people aware of what I'm doing, use the network that I have, expand that network in order to make people aware that, hey, this is a new venture and I have this knowledge base and skill set that can hopefully, lend itself to helping, whoever needs it, right? Whether it's artists, galleries, institutions. So
Wonderful. Well, we're happy to have you in the landscape because really there aren't too many in relation to, I think, how many galleries, museums, private collectors there are in this country. Relatively, I think business, consultants and businesses that help with that back end, there are relatively few. And so we always welcome, someone else who can bring their expertise in all these different institutions to this wonderful, crazy industry that we're in. I'm wondering, this segues right into questions that I have to get for our audience to get to know you a little bit better. I'm wondering, can you speak to the path that just led you to where you are now?
wow. Okay. Can I start all the way at the beginning?
Start all the way at the beginning. I want to hear it.
So it's funny because I can remember my first true just art experience and realizing that I'd seen something just magical goes all the way back to Miami, Florida. And I was a young child. I think I might have been dating myself, maybe 9 at the time, looking out over Biscayne Bay and seeing Cristo surrounded islands. And that for me was something that I was like, oh my God, what is that? Why are those pink? And what is going on here? And it just stayed in my mind. It just like really, ingrained, burned itself. And after that, I kind of realized that, wait a minute, art can be so many things, right? It can be more than just a painting on a wall. And so kind of at an early age, it just created a fascination for me with art. And so I went to school initially for photography because that's what really interested me, photography and film. And then over the course of college, it ended up going more towards fine art, contemporary art. And then after graduating, started my career first with a commercial gallery in Miami, eventually landing with what's now the Perez Art Museum, which back then was the Miami Art Museum, as a assistant registrar. And then, over the course of, spending nearly 10 years there, and then 12 years at the Aspen Art Museum, it became a way to really learn about process, right? Especially going from institutions are very similar, but you're working in a very different way in an institution that's a collecting museum than in Miami, than one that's more of the Kunsthal method, where it's just exhibitions. And so things are constantly changing and you have to be ready. And it's pretty exciting because everything you're working on is new. Every couple months, things change. And so to me, that gave me that ability to be like, oh, this is exciting. I want to, you get to do something different for a while. And then I took a short break, kind of went into a different field for a little bit, which was the film world, mainly in short documentary film. So I got to lead a nonprofit, small, short documentary film nonprofit for a short period of time after COVID. And that's when that eventually led to the move out here to Florida. And so now I found myself in kind of a new era and a new chapter to kind of say, okay, well, maybe I can bring it back to like the art world roots.
So you grew up in Florida, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And now you're back in Florida. So it's almost like a full circle moment. And now you're back, where you started with your business. I'm wondering, does it feel like a new beginning or kind of a return to familiar?
Definitely familiar. Obviously, the weather, it's hot, but the ocean's right here. So I live right by the Atlantic. And that's exciting. And I think there's something familiar, but again, it's in a new way, right? I think people think sometimes that this is it. You've embarked upon one course of your career, and you end up, and maybe it's not for every generation. I think maybe more for mine, where you felt like, okay, well, this is it. I'm going to keep doing this for who knows how long, and then all of a sudden, you go in one direction, and you never know, you end up in another direction. And so I think being able to pivot is important. I think that's, that's a great skill to have, I think, in any field. So because things change so quickly nowadays. So
Yeah, this is a through line that I'm sure our listeners are going to pick up on, is that pretty much everyone on this show, myself included, our path through this industry is not a straight line. We don't end up where we, first thought we would be when we were setting out, and that's the beauty of it, but it does require some resilience, some adaptability. And I appreciate you mentioning that early life experience that really shaped your interest in art. I'm wondering, if you think back, what's the first experience that you remember, or the first thing that you remember that resembles what you do today? Were you a little business owner? Did you like to take care of a collection? Did you collect things as a kid?
wow, that's a really good question. I think one of my favorite things was really kind of sharing art with people, like experiencing that together is an exciting part of being able to say, hey, look, we're looking at whether it's, a beautiful painting or a photograph on the wall. I think shared experiences as they relate to art is probably one of the most transformative, experiences you can have, because, when you're looking at something, it's great when you can enjoy it by yourself, but when you can actually enjoy that with others, I think that's even better, right? And it's something that, you kind of look at each other and you're like, wait a minute, right? Whether it's with a friend, partner, you can talk about that and realize, like, what it meant to each one of you. Or if it's with a collector, you're like, oh, they have a very personal attachment because they know the artist or they purchase it for a particular reason. So, and also working at museums and institutions, it was always fun to come in to see how art really connected with people, right? And I think especially in times like these, sometimes art is all we have left, because we're like, okay, I don't want to say it's all we have left, but it's a great way to kind of say, be outside ourselves for a moment. So,
As you were growing up, did you go to museums and galleries, or was it something?
well, I always sought them out. I was like, wait a minute, we're going where? Okay, great. Let's find, the museums or the art galleries. And so,
And do you remember, even as a kid, kind of connecting with the people that you were with, like having these shared experiences in those gallery spaces?
yeah, I mean, generally, I think at that point it was my family, right? And then later on, it was friends, and being able to kind of like remembering like first trips to like MoMA and things like that. That it was,
Ah, that's incredible. Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of people enter this field because of being moved, at a museum. I can speak myself included, but my dad's an artist, and I grew up going to museums and just like experiencing a moment of awe, like with art. There's really nothing like it.
yeah, no, exactly.
If we're gonna fast forward to your day-to-day life today as a business owner, if we had a backstage pass to a typical day in your work life, what would we see?
Oh boy. Let's see. Well, I try to wake up early, most days. Unfortunately, I just had an injury the other day, which is kind of like derailed that a little bit, my normal cycle. So, but I typically get up early, take my dog for a walk on the beach, come back, check emails. Right now, it's a lot of business development, so I'm sending a lot of emails out to people, introducing my business, what I'm doing, and then trying to also get out and co-work a little bit. Just kind of not co-work, but go to spaces where I can, you know, be more social, whether it's maybe a coffee shop or a co-working space, and you get to be around others, because I think as a sole business owner, that can also be kind of a little bit isolating, and you have to find ways to kind of like break that cycle. So I think that's important as well. Yeah, I mean, there's not, I'd say putting events on the calendar, and obviously like going out to galleries or museums, so you can realize like, okay, this is why I'm doing this now, right? So
Wonderful. Yeah, I think entrepreneurship in this space is pretty a similar experience from those of us that come from institutions with a big team, and you're around people and you're around collections all day, to being in this bubble. Being a business owner, it is isolating. And that is a great tip, going out to cafes, co-working spaces, just being around people can be a bit energizing and fill that void. I'm wondering, is there something about your work, your business or what you do for your clients that most people maybe they don't realize, but they should realize?
I think I always try to go, generally I go above and beyond for my clients, making sure that I'm thorough in, in everything I do so that they feel that they're getting value for my services. So I think that's important that I'm always, thinking about what their process, not just their process, but like their collections, treating it as my own. That I'm like, okay, if I own this, what would I be thinking? What would I be doing? So I think that's important to kind of, offers a little bit more of that personal touch. So.
So I think maybe another way to reframe is that people don't realize maybe and that they should that it takes a personal touch and understanding a collection and a collector deeply to do the best work for them. It's not like there's a set protocol done and dusted, you're out of there.
Yeah, no, it's very true. Yeah, there's not, especially I think the way I work, it's very much kind of on call. So it's not, something that, like you said, it's a set schedule. It's like, no, I'm always thinking about like, oh, hey, have you, if it's something related to a work in their collection or, particular genre that they're interested in, it's like, hey, have you seen this or have you, heard about this? So
And tell us a little bit more about the services that you provide to your clients.
So yeah, so generally what I've been doing is providing services based on art collection management. So everything from condition reports, if it has to do with project management, maybe it's something more related to an exhibition, logistics around shipping or installations. That's also important. And then the other one is for newer collectors. Collection organization and collection building, because a lot of people don't realize that it's like, once you get past, let's say 25 works, maybe more in your collection, you need to start having a thought of how to organize it, right? Databases, insurance is a big thing. People don't realize like, hey, guess what? Your artwork, once you start to compile it, it's starting to push a value of, let's say, over 50,000 or more, that's not always going to be covered by your homeowner's insurance policy. So thinking that through, thinking about that process, I think is important. So that's where my services have gone to right now in terms of like helping people either if they have established collections, just work with them on conservation issues, or new collectors work on establishing, a set collection that they can basically work from. So as they require new works, we're adding them to that database and cataloging them. So
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, it's really filling a void, what you do in terms of especially new collectors, because I don't think there's a lot of resources out there for people who are just starting a collection. It's not like they've inherited it and they think this big collection's been passed down through generations. Like where do you even start? Are there resources that you point new collectors to, or are you the resource?
I try to be the resource. That's actually, because it's going to vary depending on where somebody is, right? The resources that they have. So, can't compare, somebody who's a collector in Arkansas versus a collector in New York City. The resources are going to be different, and I think it's a matter of knowing what their needs are. And obviously, collections just vary so differently, right? Somebody who's collecting photography versus somebody who's collecting, I don't know, ceramics. It's going to be vastly different. So I think each approach has to be tailored and bespoke. So from that regard, it's, once I know what their end goals are, then it's assembling those resources for them, because it's going to vary. Yeah, there are general resources, but I think it always helps to kind of understand what their goals are.
Yeah, yeah. And I heard you mention, collectors in kind of different, even geographic regions are going to maybe have different needs or priorities. Do you see a big difference between collectors maybe in Colorado and then collectors in around where you are now, around Miami?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest difference Yeah, I mean, not necessarily, I think, between collectors, but I think sometimes the issues that they face, right? It's always going to be around typically like climate, right? Somebody who's, and it's interesting. I remember seeing works that were transported from a very humid climate like South Florida to Colorado, and people were wondering, wait, why is this work changing? Like all of a sudden, like we're seeing these effects, and most of it has to do with that climate where you're like, yeah, you're moving something from a 65, 70-degree humidity to somewhere that's less than half of that, 30, and guess what? Things are going to be impacted. So I think that's sort of the foresight and kind of having that understanding that things don't just, stay the same when they are moved. So
Yeah, it's a great point. It's one that I coach even museums through, is understanding the effects of the environment of the artwork, and how the artwork will change if you change its environment, just like we do. We get chaplets in Colorado and dry skin out here. Yeah, wonderful. I want to move us into our rapid fire Q&A portion of the episode, if you're ready. Okay, so the only rules are that you can't think too long. Just, first thing that comes to mind. And don't make fun of my surfing and DJing. I got the lingo from the internet. Okay. All right, first question. What type of music would you prefer when you're installing an exhibit? Calm, jazz, or high energy techno?
jazz.
If your career were a wave that you were surfing, would it be a smooth swell or a wild barrel?
Ooh. Wild barrel.
Which artist, living or dead, would you love to curate a show for?
Oh, that one. Okay. Christo.
Very cool. Okay, what's more nerve-wracking, a major exhibition opening night or cooking for friends?
Cooking for friends.
Last question. If your DJ set could capture the vibe of the art world right now, what track or genre would you spin?
I would spin reggaeton.
I love it. I would have never guessed. Thank you for humoring me with this rapid fire Q&A. I appreciate it.
Happy to, yeah. I was thinking Bad Buddy, so that's what it is.
Oh, perfect. Yes, so topical. That's great. Well, thank you for being a good sport. And this was so great. Tell us, where can listeners find and engage with you?
Oh, yes. They can check out my website, which is LRY, my initials, art.com. And there they can reach out, connect with me, and just ask any questions they may have about their collections.
And you're having a promotion right now for new clients, right?
Yeah, anybody who reaches out, mentions that they found me on the Museum Backstage podcast will get an hour free consultation.
Ah, wonderful. Well, everyone take advantage of it because we're all collectors. Whether you think you are or not, we all have things that are important to us that we've assembled over our lives. And Luis and other people in this space are just so knowledgeable, and I would, take advantage of it. Well, thank you so much, Luis.
Thank you, Samantha. I appreciate you having me on here.
Oh, absolutely. Anytime you want to come back, we're happy to have you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a wrap, everyone. Thanks, Luis, for taking us backstage today, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Bye-bye.
Museum Backstage podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and see you on the next episode.